And that's what I did. With these papers in hand, I went with the lady to a real estater. I still had some money with me. I had all my money my mother gave me. It was gold, it wasn't money, gold coins. And she went with me to a real estater, and she said that a young girl, she made up a story, who lost her parents, and she lives at the western coast of Poland, so the Germans killed her parents. She is looking for a place to live, and she's looking for a room. And this man found us a room. It was a poor thing, like half of this room, kitchen included. I mean, stove included. You could cook in it. And there was a young couple, not very young, much older than myself, who wanted to sell it. So I told the same story, and I said I'm willing to buy it. But in order to buy it, at that time, you had to ask the owner of the house for permission. So they told me, we have to go upstairs, one store up, live the owners of the house. I spoke to him already, and he is willing to agree. Let's go together, I'll present you, and we'll do the deal. And we went there. The owners, the woman and her husband and a young son, said they agree, and therefore all I have to do is to give the money, and it will belong to me. So I paid, and I stayed in this place. They moved out, I moved in, and I was happy. I had a roof over my head. And that's when I started to try to bring my mother. There was only one telephone apparat in the whole ghetto, and all the Jews were using it whenever they needed. So I made an arrangement with my mother before I left that on the given day I will call her at 10 o'clock in the morning and tell her what is going on. If I don't call, it means I don't live. And I called, and she was at the telephone, and I could hear her voice, and I told her I am happy, I have a place to live. All she has to do is to somehow to get out of the ghetto and come to the same lady who gave me shelter. The next day she said she will do it. And the next day she came. Waiting for her was a torture. I was waiting for her all day long, and there was a curfew at 8 o'clock at night. And I remember I was sitting in the chair, till 7 o'clock, and I couldn't wait and she didn't come. I couldn't wait any longer. I went out, and then I came home 5 to 8, and here she was. In her robe, sitting, very tired, very unhappy, but she was sitting on the chair, and here she was. So I took her with me, and almost after the curfew, we went to this little apartment. And we couldn't be more happy. We were together, and somehow I paid for papers for her too. So it started to be a little better. She didn't look Polish at all. She had black hair and blue eyes, and she had Jewish features. And I remember I asked somebody, a girlfriend of mine, before, do you think my mother, because we are considering these things all the time, do you think my mother speaks Polish, good Polish? I was sure she did. According to me, she did. And this girlfriend of mine said, I remember it, your mother speaks Polish like a Jew who speaks good Polish, which is not the same. She didn't speak exactly what she should have. And she had I bought a handkerchief, or whatever you call it. It was very yellow, and she was supposed to have it on her head all the time to look a little less black. Everybody was doing whatever he could not to look that Jewish. And that's how we started to live. I found myself a job. I was a a maidservant in somebody else's house. Why? Because Jewish people were never worked as maidservants. So we figured that to be a maidservant turns your mind out of thinking that you are Jewish. So this is the best post you can find. And I found a job. And I also received from the Germans the real, true, good papers. Good identification card with a picture, with everything that was needed. For a few months I lived like that with my mother, and I was really happy. And one day I came home, and she told me, I have bad news for you. And the bad news were the former owner of this poor place came to find out if there are any letters for him in the post. And she had to open the door because she was loud. She was doing something so loud that he kept knocking at the door, and she couldn't keep him from opening. She opened and she gave him tea, and they had a very nice talk, and he seemed to be very nice, but when he was leaving, he said, this handkerchief is not going to help you. This yellow thing on your head is not going to help you. Well, that was like a death sentence already. If he said that, it means he knew with whom he was dealing. And the next day he came and he said, I told everything to my wife. She is desperate. She wants the place back. All right, where is the money? You have no money anymore. I mean, he wanted the place back, but he didn't want to give us back the money. They could do anything to us, whatever they wished. So I told him to come a few days later, and I went upstairs to see the owner of the house, because I remember they were nice people. And I told the lady, the old lady, the whole story, that he came and he wants back his apartment. What shall I say? She says, why does he want it? He says, we are Jews. I answered, this is crazy. I don't know why he says that. The lady went to talk to her husband, and then she came with a good advice to me. She said, there were some decent people, and she was one of those. She said, if you feel you are Jewish, you better move out as soon as possible. And if you both of you, and if you feel you are not, then I will give you a policeman, and he will let this scoundrel, he will let him have it. He will give him a piece of his mind. Well, this sounded very, very decent, but it was a good advice, but what could I do? So, of course, we moved away, but this lady said, don't move, don't let him in. I will buy this apartment from you. She didn't give us as much as we gave, but it was only easy to understand. So she bought this apartment from us, and she gave us a good advice, and she was nice. And she had a very nice son. And this son became my husband later. And I have 3 children by him. That's another story. After his death, I decided to come to America. I remember one day in the same apartment where we still lived, my mother woke me up and he said, promise me that if you survive, you'll go to America, don't stay in this country. That's when it happened. Anyway, I moved. I found another job living in, which means I took care of a girl, of a little child, and I was taking care of the whole household, and I was given a room there. And for my mother, I found a place. There were places where you were supposed to pay, and they kept you as a Jew. They knew. They were making money this way. People were making fortunes at that time, with so many Jews lost. So I found a family like that, and they took my mother. I was bringing money every first day of every month, and I was again happy for some time. And one day, my mother came all of a sudden to see me, and she said, I am being expelled from this place. How come? The daughter of those people came, a grown-up, an adult person, and she said, you kick her out of here, just like you here, in presence of my mother. And he said, why? She's a nice person, and she peels potatoes for us, and she pays, so what do you want? I'll give you somebody that will pay much better. Another Jew talked her into kicking out my mother, and that's what they did. So again, I had no place for my mother. And it so happened, this was my bad luck that it happened during the 2 days of holiday. The holiday is like Lag BaOmer, yes? Green holidays. Or there is another 2 days for the Gentiles, which is also called green holidays. And during these 2 days, nobody has time, or nobody can be bothered with saving an old Jewish lady. I went to some other friends, Polish friends, many of them, and one lady told me, just keep her for these 2 days, and after the holidays are over, we will find something for her. And I told it to my mother, and somehow she disappeared, and I never saw her again. These 2 days was enough for her to be trapped somewhere, I don't know. What do you want to listen again? So I lost my mother, and I was looking for her. And that's when I went again to those people who seemed decent to me, with this young son, and I asked them if they have seen my mother. Maybe she was there. She wasn't. Then I went to another woman who used to do laundry for us. She was an elderly woman with a 20-year-old scoundrel boyfriend. He was taking advantage of her, taking all the money she had and everything. And I remember I was told never to go there, because she is very nice and decent, but this young man is terrible. Well, I went there, and this woman told me, yes, your mother was here. She spoke to my stash, and then they left together. And you better leave, because he is going to come very soon, and it's better for him not to see you, and for you not to see him. She knew he was a bad guy, but he was her lover. What can you do? I stayed for some more time, and he came. And he was very happy to see me. He said, I was with your mother. I know she was desperate. We went down together. I don't know what she did, but as soon as I find her, I will tell you. Just give me your address. He also mentioned that she wanted to commit suicide, that she wanted to drown herself in the river that's passing by Warsaw. Maybe she did go to the river, he said. Maybe not. I'll let you know. Just give me your address. And I was so scared that I gave him the address, but it was not my address. I pretended I trusted him. I gave him a telephone number, an address, everything, just to get rid of him, because I could see that it was a lost cause. And I never saw him again. But I never saw my mother again either. In the meantime, the Jewish uprising had place in Warsaw. It was April 19th. And we were very, very much, not involved, because we pretended being Polish already, but we were very shaky about it. And you all know what happened. Everybody knows what happened.
I was just interested when the ghetto uprising occurred. You were outside.
Yes.
What was your awareness of what was happening in the ghetto?
We were aware of everything.
Could you hear it?
I could hear, because this little room where I lived with my mother at that time was located not far from the ghetto walls. and we could hear the shooting and see the fire. I remember that my mother cried a lot. She couldn't take it. I was stronger, but she just couldn't take it. She used to say, the last of our youth are perishing, and we can do nothing about it. And she used to say, go to America, go to America. Yes, I remember it. It didn't take long. However, it compromised the Germans very much, because short as it was too long for them. It was a handful of young men and the whole German army against them. But not everybody knows that there were two uprisings in Warsaw, I told you. I was surprised to find out here that the Jewish people know as much of the of history as the Jews go, and no more. Nobody knew that there was another uprising in Warsaw, and it was a Polish uprising. It was the Germans were about to lose the war. It was very close to the end of the war, and the Poles believed that if they start now, the Russian army will not walk in, and if it does, they will be the first one there, which was stupid because we weren't strong enough, and the Germans were still strong enough to do something. So the Polish uprising started, and to make a long story short, the Germans crushed it. They expelled all the inhabitants of Warsaw out of the city, and they put the city to ashes. The whole city was flat. And they let us go, but they forced the farmers to take one Polish family each, one Warsaw family. They have an instinct of order. Everything has to be in Ordnung. So what they did, they placed every Warsaw family with each farmer's family. And it worked. Somehow they found place for us. And since the Polish uprising, I was better off, because so many people lost their documents, and so many people lost everything, that I became one of them. I wasn't that different from everybody else. I found, my boyfriend found me, and then we both found his parents, and we lived, all the four of us, at a farmer's family for a few months until the end of the war. When the war ended, we came by foot back to Warsaw, because we come from Warsaw, and that's where we wanted to stay. So it was also winter. It was 17th of January, I think, next year, when we came back to Warsaw. And we got married, and we started to live. We received an apartment, and all the four of us lived together in this apartment. Ours was an interfaith marriage without any religion. And the communists didn't require any religious marriage, so it was all right. And I had 3 children later on. I have 3 children with him, who didn't realize they were Jewish. Almost all their life they didn't know about it. When my son decided to run away from he decided to run away from the country, not because of being Jewish, because he never knew he was, but because of the communists. A few days before he left, I told, when everything was ready and he already completed his studies, and he was 22 years old or something, I told him who he was. And he was so surprised. So it was unheard to him. He just couldn't believe. But he took it, he accepted it with this unbelievable thing, with pride and joy. This I have to say, because I knew how to give them the proper upbringing. I think I knew. After he left, I told my next child, my daughter, and the youngest one. And they both were proud and happy knowing that they are Jewish. If you want to tell me something about my children, I can tell you that a few years before, like 10 years before, when they were just children, they came from school one day, very embarrassed and very involved with something. And my oldest child, my son, asked me, why do we dislike Jews so much? I remember it, because I had an answer ready to it. And I said, well, what do you mean we dislike Jews so much? Who told you that? And he said, do you dislike Jews that much? He said, no, but at school we heard that. So they were told at school to dislike the Jews. And I explained him, I said to him and to his sisters, it's not so unusual. Jews are a little different from Poles. I stopped saying us, I said Poles. They are a little different. They are much more capable, talented. They dress a little different, they talk a little different, and most of all, it is jealousy and envy that makes Jews being disliked by Poles. And did anybody approach you? Did anybody try to hit you or something? If it happens, remember, hit back. Don't be any different. And to prove that the Jews are more talented, I said, as of that time, they heard about the Nobel Prize, because I told them very often about the Nobel Prize. And I said, do you know how many Jews have Nobel Prize? There are 50 people, which was true. And Poles are only 2, which was also true. So this was some proof. And they were relieved. They went to their room and they were satisfied with my answer. Now, a few years later, I think it was 10 years later, when I told my daughters, he was already gone abroad, and I told my daughters that they were Jewish, they were very happy, much to my surprise, because I didn't know what made them that happy. And my youngest daughter said, don't you know that they are so talented? You have no idea. Do you know that they have 50 Nobel Prizes? She forgot that she got it from me. And that's how I realized that it's very important to give the children a proper upbringing. She said, don't you know how smart they are? I'm very happy. That's all I have to tell you.
And how have your children got children? And
yes.
And
they are all married. They are all intermarried.
Mm-hmm.
My son, my American son, married a Chinese girl, and my both girls are married to Polish boys. Boys, they have children already, but they know the girls are Jewish, and they have children. Yes, one of them has 3, and one has 2 boys, and everything is all right.
And they do they sort of let their children know they're Jewish? Is it part of how they bring their own children?
I don't know about the little children, but my children and my in-laws know, and they are aware of it, and everything is all right. Or else they wouldn't choose these particular girls. They didn't have to marry Jewish girls. Our generation, had no choice, because there were almost no young men during the German occupation. The girls could survive, but the boys were almost, it was a death sentence. If a Jew was stopped on the street by anybody and asked, it was already a death sentence, and you know why. So there was almost no Jewish boys, and I have many friends, girlfriends, who married Polish guys. And the couples are very happy with each other. And I told myself I don't want to be Jewish anymore. Somehow it didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I told my children and I came here. That's how it ends. That's how the story ends.
And in recent times, did any of your friends or neighbors in Poland ever know that you were Jewish, or basically
No.
do you live as a...
No, except
Pole?
for the young ladies who are Jewish. And they know very well, and so do their husbands. Their husbands. You can't hide it from your husband. It's impossible. Other people don't know, and that's why I care so much for not being betrayed, because I like them. They are very often very decent people, and they would feel very bad about my having said the whole truth here. They would probably say, is that why you came to America, to say all that about yourself and us? No, I don't want it. I have very good friends among Poles, and they don't know I am Jewish. And I am more than 40 years old, and they still don't know.
Do you think that they'd feel deceived at all?
I think and I believe they would feel deceived, yes. I would feel deceived if I had a good friend and she left for America and told all kinds of things that I didn't know about. I would feel bad about it, of course. It's only natural. And I keep correspondence with them. We write letters to each other. We send each other good wishes for the holiday. So why should I break all this? I can't see why.
How do you feel about Israel? Does it mean anything to you particularly? Yeah, I mean, does it?
I'll be frank with you. I think very much of Israel. I think very much of the boys who perished in the Jewish uprising. I feel very unhappy when I look at the map and I see this little tiny country. My heart is bleeding. I can hardly believe how it can work that small. People say it can. But I belong to the people that perished. Can you stop for a moment? It is like in this song, My Heart Belongs to Daddy. I'm not that much involved with Zionism, with all the people who are there, because I all belong backwards. I look backwards. And it's too late now to change. Thank you. One day I told our common friend Shoshana the same thing, that I feel more sorry, and I can understand her, but she was really outraged. She couldn't care less for the people who suffered and perished back in Warsaw.
Have you ever visited Israel?
No, I would like to. I would like to go there, and I'm sure I would find people that I know. I remember that right after the war ended, when I and my husband came back to Warsaw, and we found quite a nice place to live, and we took his mother and father from the country to live with us. At the same time, there was a Jewish community, and they created a shelter for Jewish remnants coming back from Auschwitz. And I went there one day. Something magnetizes you. I didn't want to go, but I went. And I found two of my girlfriends and neighbors from the same house where I lived. So, of course, we were happy with each other. And they showed me the 2 beds given to them because they came from Auschwitz. And I remember I came next day, or early in the morning, to invite them to my home because I had a home already. And what I found them still sleeping, not on the beds, but on the doors taken out of the place where the door is supposed to be. And I said, why do you sleep? Why do you lay down on the floor, on a door, instead of having a comfortable bed? And they said, we are not used to beds anymore. We can't sleep on the beds. Can you imagine? We are so used to sleep on something very hard and cold that we prefer the doors. And many other girls were sleeping on the doors too. I was amazed. So they were still more miserable. And I invited them home. They stayed with me for a few days, and my mother-in-law, who was a very good woman, she had endless discussions with them. And then they said, one day they said, we are leaving. We had tickets and we are leaving for Tel Aviv. So I have some friends there. And they started to talk me into leaving everything and going with them. And I said, no, I'm too much involved. I have a husband whom I love. I have a family. I have everything here now. I'm not going. And when they said goodbye and thank you and they left, I told it to my mother-in-law. And she was so mad. She said, I gave them everything I could. We gave them comfortable beds and we fed them for a few days and we were so nice and sweet to them. And as a reward, they tried to talk you out of Poland, of us. So there were very different points of view. I remember how mad she was with them. They probably are alive because they are my age. And I could find them if I went to Israel. Yes, of course. I would like to.
Do you know whatever happened to the gentleman who you escaped from the ghetto with?
Yes, somehow I knew he was he originated from another city, second biggest city in Poland, named Lodz. Probably you heard about Lodz. He was from Lodz, and when I went to Lodz one day, I found in the telephone directory his name, and I called, and he invited me, and I went there. He had black hair, and looked like a Jew, like before. And I think he completed the medical studies or something. He was a doctor. He didn't have much time for me, but of course we spoke and we both survived. So this was amazing.
How did he survive?
Mm-hmm.
How did he do that? Did he have friends?
He had friends, yes. When he decided to go, he was more not desperate, but he had more decision than I did. I asked him to help me, and I wanted to go with him, but he really knew where he was going and what he was going to do. He probably had some friends, and he survived together with his father. His father was in Lodz, in the same apartment, so he was more fortunate than me. I remember he had a pure Polish name, which didn't hurt, and he survived.
What was his name?
Józef Grodzicki. If this tells you something. Grodzicki is a very Polish name. And Józef is Joseph. He didn't even change his name. He didn't have to. Thank you very much.
Most Jews had identifiably Jewish names. Was it very rare for a Jew to have a Polish?
Oh, it wasn't very rare. It wasn't, but more Jews had Jewish names, like they have here. Mm-hmm. When I see the cast of some movies in the TV, they are mostly Jews. I mean Jewish names. And back in Poland, it wasn't that obvious. I had a Jewish name. I had to change it, but he didn't. And it turned out that I found later on quite a few people, like my old teacher of French language, who survived the war. She also didn't change her name. She's still living, and I am sending her money. Poor as I am helping her because she's alone, and somebody has to help her. And there is a few of my school girlfriends married to Poles, as I told you before. They also live under false names till now.
And you're still in contact with them now?
Absolutely. Of course, we are like family. That's why I say I belong there. If you expected me to be very Zionist and very Jewish in Israeli meaning, then I disappointed you.
So then what your sort of reaction and feelings were having gone through what you've experienced?
I wish the best to the Israel, but I'm so much afraid. It is so small. How can a small thing like that survive? I don't know. Surrounded by an ocean of Arabs. That's how I feel about it. I'm sorry.
What do you think about the current changes in Europe with the unification of Germany and the overthrow?
Well, I have mixed feelings. When I first heard about the Berlin Wall falling apart, and I go every Tuesday to the current events in the Jewish Community Center. It's a very interesting meeting. I really enjoy it very much, and I even talk sometimes. I say a few words. I was surprised with the feeling of relief and happiness here among Jewish people towards this wall. I couldn't care less. I mean, I lived within a wall and outside of the wall, much bigger and much more terrible than their Berlin Wall. I don't care for it. I wasn't happy at all. I'm not happy with the reunification at all. I only hope they are going to quarrel so much that it won't help them a lot. That's the feeling I have. Or else they are going to threaten Europe. The first thing, they are going to claim the Polish part of the country which belonged to Germans before. And they promise they will not. Of course they will. I have a paper signed. That's how I feel about it. And as far as the communist countries go, let them take care of themselves. And I don't think my opinions are so very much important because I'm not a politician. I say what I feel, and that's all.
Well, there's a few things I would like just to go back to briefly, if you don't mind, just a few small points, and then I'll let Judy ask if she has any sort of questions as well.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I was interested to know about was with respect to the identification marks that Jews, for instance, did they have to wear a star or a patch?
Yes.
And when did that first happen, that they had to be
very
openly identified?
early. I forgot to tell you that one of the posters was about that, that we Jews have to wear quite different signs. Jews from Warsaw had bands. It was called Schandebande. Schandebande means it's a band of shame. We should be ashamed of being Jewish. And they were white with blue sign of David. And you absolutely had to have it on, or else you were killed without any asking questions. in lodge, they had yellow patches, and they were wearing them here. It was glued. I don't know exactly, or sewn. And later on, in the ghetto, people in the death camps, people were tattooed. I have two friends who have a tattoo on their hands. Mm-hmm. I didn't because I was Polish. This in Polish. He didn't know any other language. They were beautiful. We all, my generation, grew up raised on his verses. When he addressed himself to the Polish or German population, there was anger and fire in his satiric poetry. He was hitting them. He was shooting at them. When he addressed us, he was crying. And there was blood in his tears. The verses were just wonderful. And one day I took part in a heritage class that I felt I can name him, and I can say that there was a poet who said something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I said it was Julian Tuwim, and you certainly heard about him. And there was silence. Nobody, not one person, knew about Julian Tuwim. Isn't that a shame? Of course, you can't translate poetry, but at least you can know the name of the biggest Jewish poet who wrote for Jewish people in Polish. And my friends from the JCC told me later on, we could see how surprised you were. Now, how could I not be surprised? Nobody knew who Julian Tuwim was. And I can tell you that because of his poetry, the Germans knew where he lived, and he came to search for him. He fled. He happened to flee ahead of time to America, and he spent all the time of the war in New York with his wife. Probably nobody knew that he wrote verses. I don't know. All I know is that his mother and his sister perished in Lodz. Because when the Germans came, the mother said she didn't know where he was, and he disappeared somewhere. Well, after all, you don't have to know where your son is. But they were very smart, so they killed her in a terrible way. They threw her out of the balcony of the third floor on the concrete. Can you imagine something like that? He never got the news how she perished. He knew that he lost his mother and his sister, but nobody told him how, because it was too terrible. And a person like this is not even known. What a wasted life. I was very shocked. Of course, I'm not going to translate his poetry, but if I could, I would do that.
Do you still
he
have
deserves
his
it.
poetry?
Of course. I know everything by heart. I can tell you that. As poor an actor as I am. And there was another person close to, he wasn't close to me, he didn't even know me, but I knew him. There was a teacher of mine. He was teaching in my school. His name, this maybe you know, maybe it's more familiar to you. His name was Emanuel Ringelblum.
Chronicler of events.
How do you know?
I've read a bit about it.
He decided to make a chronicle and describe every day, day after day, what happened, what the Germans did to us. And he managed somehow to hide those papers so well that they have not been discovered and they have not been destroyed. After the war, he was killed, but some people showed where it was hidden. You know how it was hidden?
Mm.
The papers were hidden in big cans, milk cans, very thick and very tight, so they didn't decay. He poured something on it to preserve it from decaying. And these chronics survived. He was my teacher. I knew him very well. These were the people who tried to survive or did survive easier than the poor Jews from the little shtetls. They had no chance. Do you have any more questions?
Yeah. Did your grandparents, did they go into the ghetto as well with you and your parents? Or?
My mother's mother lived in a small town, and all I know is, and she didn't have her father. I never knew him. He died before I was born. I know that my grandmother died the very day of their forced moving to the ghetto. They lived outside of the ghetto near Lodz, and they were supposed to move into it. And the brothers of my mother found something, and they were in the process of moving, and she died. They didn't even have beds in the apartment because they moved the beds in there. So they put her on a table, and on the table she died. And my father's father, the mother died before the war, I remember it, and the father, my father decided to take him because the families were putting themselves together, so he invited him to live with us. And since the grandfather was kosher, he promised that he will eat a different food, and my father will see to it that everything is all right. And he stayed with us for 2 or 3 days, and he moved away. He said, he had a white, big beard, I remember. And he said, I lived so long as a devoted Jew